Okay, so this is the last video in the romantic series, although it really was kind of designed to be at the front of it. It just didn't work out that way with the videos. So the two things that we're going to cover, uh, it's actually in the early romantic period. One is the invention of what we call song, which in German is called Lied, and it is for singer and piano. That's the instrumentation, singer and piano. Very common instrumentation in pop music today for songs, and that's called Lied. The greatest exponent and greatest and earliest master, and maybe the greatest master of that, is Franz Schubert, who lived from 1797 to 1828. Notice Beethoven dies in 1827, so Beethoven is really over the cusp, kind of sticking his foot into the future there, and the past simultaneously. Like Beethoven, Schubert starts writing his Ninth Symphony and dies. Either which way, really important thing about Schubert is he was a classical guitar player, which the books never talk about, and wrote a lot of these Lied on his guitar and then translated it or transcribed it to the piano. So again, song is Lied, L-I-E-D, in German, and it's piano accompaniment and voice using romantic poetry of the day. And it was designed to have an intimate mood, not necessarily intended for the concert hall, or intended for sort of indoor concerts in the parlor. The musical form often is through composed, where you have different music for each musical stanza, and sometimes you would use the same music for all of the stanzas. That's called strophic music. So a lot of pop music, when we talk about the verse of a song, the verses are strophic. It's all the same music for those stanzas. So Schubert writes this sort of great, fantastic Lied called the Erl King. I won't try to pronounce the German. And it is written on the text of Goethe. And essentially the story of the Erl King is a sort of a truly romantic story. A gentleman is riding on horseback through the night with his child on his back. His child is deathly ill, and he keeps looking around, the child does, hearing voices. And the father says, "There's no demon, there's no Erl King, that's just a legend." And the boy is saying, "No, no, no, he's luring me to the other side through this mist." And he said, "There are these beautiful women and all these things." And the dad says, "No, no, you're just sick, we need to get you help." And they finally arrive home, and the boy's dead, and that marks the end of the song. It's very noticeable in the song because when the word dead happens, there's just the word dead and the music stops. In the beginning of the song, you'll hear a galloping piano part. It's actually supposed to be the sound of the galloping horse hooves as they go through it. What you're going to hear is one singer singing all parts. So you have the narrator, you have the boy, and you have the father. And each of the musical characters are different. They're in a different part of the musical range. Some of them are very smooth sounding. Some of the characters are very lyrical. Some of the characters aren't. And so within the one singer, it plays three different parts, and you can tell which part of the story the singer is bringing across by listening to the actual musical range and sort of the musical phrasing. Eventually, song composers will have collections of songs. These are called song cycles. It's a group of songs with a common theme, sometimes based on a ready-made group, but quite oftentimes it would be a collection of songs by the same composer that he would assemble as a set based on a similar content, but they weren't necessarily written together as a cycle. And that's about the extent of what we're going to cover about that early vocal music, just given the lack of time that we have. So the second part of this video deals with the piano. There are a couple of different things going on in solo piano literature. Most importantly is what's called a character piece, which is a short piano piece. It's a miniature. It's designed to portray a distinct mood or a single character, kind of like the Lied, but without a poem. And they're composed for all levels of difficulty, so there are simple character pieces that most basic piano players could play, and there's some very, very complicated ones as well. And the most famous one of those is Carnival, that collection by Robert Schumann, but we're going to have to skip that for the purposes of we're running out of time. And we're going to look at Frederick Chopin. So Chopin was this frail composer, born in Warsaw, dies in Paris, or lives in Paris for the most part. He almost exclusively composed for the piano, even the works that orchestra, piano, and orchestra. He's kind of a one-trick pony, just a really good one-trick pony. He actually even tuned his piano differently than most people, and would often play with one hand in rubato, that's slowing and pushing and pulling at a time, and one hand in mechanical time. He had very frail health and died of tuberculosis. Now he did run in very, very high society circles and hung out with a lot of the famous artists of the day. So the piece that you're going to listen to is the Nocturne in F sharp minor, or sort of a kind of a piece of night music. What you want to listen to or focus on when you're listening to the Nocturne is imagine that the musical time, it's almost inebriated time. It's almost as if the metronome or the pulse of the music is drunk, and it comes in and out of focus. So if you can imagine the time being a spinning top, there are definitely clear moments at cadences and at ends of phrases, and even in the middle of phrases, where it seems like somebody lightly tapped the spinning top, and it begins to wobble in and out of that perfect spin, but it eventually catches itself up and catches the beat and spins perfectly back in time. And that happens all throughout. This quality is often sort of described as dreamy when you listen to this music. Oh, it's very dreamlike, or sort of trance-like, and that's because dream time is a non-chronological, non-teleological form of time. It's just time that kind of comes in and out of focus. It's hard to know exactly where you are, but you are in space and time. It's just not following the mechanical clock, so to speak. And so if you listen to the Nocturne in F sharp minor that way, where if it was played in strict time, it would definitely not be quote unquote dreamy. But really what's going on is that this pushing and pulling, or this sort of inebriated, almost like a drunken dance kind of type of time, where you're sort of drunk dancing, and then you catch yourself and you get back into the beat and back into the right step of the dance, with nothing lost except you looked kind of wobbly in between. This kind of notion of time is very, very evident in most of the music of the Romantic era, and that's rubato, and that's the Chopin Nocturne. So I'll send those links out. Again, you have the 20th century videos as well. Next week we'll wrap up the course by finishing the 20th century, and so we have a kind of a big push to the end. So do your work and do it diligently. I'll send out the final exam study guide a little bit earlier than the customary week, so that you have a little bit more time to look at it. The 20th century listening will actually be during the final. We'll have the Romantic listening next week, and the Romantic homework should be up either tonight or tomorrow. You can have some extra time to do that. Again, we're all pretty loosey-goosey with deadlines here outside of when the final exam is. So see you next week.